She refused to sit near me at the wedding until she realized it was my son getting married. The whispers hit first, sharp and smug, as if I didn't belong at the table where my own joy was being served. But pride has a way of choking on the truth on introduction. One name, and the room shifted in my favor. I didn't need to raise my voice. The moment did it for me. By the end of this, you'll know exactly how a single reveal turned humiliation into quiet victory. Now let me take you back to where it truly began. The day the invitation arrived. The invitation arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon, slipped through the mail slot with the usual stack of bills and advertisements. But I knew instantly, before I even touched it, that this envelope was different. The paper was heavier, smoother, with a shimmer that caught the sunlight as it lay there on the floor like it belonged on a silver tray instead of next to grocery coupons. I bent down, picked it up carefully, and ran my fingers across the gold-embossed letters. My son's name was printed there, joined with hers, and for a moment, everything else around me blurred. My heart swelled so full it felt as though it might burst through my chest. My boimy little boy was getting married. I stood in my kitchen, staring at that invitation for longer than I care to admit. I could see him at 6 years old, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, carefully building towers with mismatched blocks. I could see him at 12, nervous before his first school dance, tugging at his too large tie as I reassured him that every girl in the room would be lucky just to share one song with him. And now here I was, holding proof that the boy I had raised through scraped knees, heartbreaks, and endless late nights had become a man ready to start his own family. I should have been nothing but joyful. I should have been shouting, crying, calling every friend I had to announce the news, but beneath the joy, a shadow curled tight in my chest, because I knew who else would be there. Yet the word itself was enough to make my stomach tighten. We had crossed paths too many times for me to pretend it didn't matter. She was always there at family gatherings, at community events, at any place where people came together to celebrate. And every time she made sure I felt the sting of her presence. She had a way of looking at me without really looking, of letting her eyes slide from my shoes to my hair in one long, silent judgment. A way of smiling with the light, her lips pressed so tightly together that it never reached her eyes. She never had to raise her voice. Her superiority spoke in the smallest gestures, the tilt of her head, the sharpness of her laugh, the careless remarks dropped just loud enough for me to hear. I remembered one birthday party years ago. She had leaned across the table, her perfume thick in the air, and said with a laugh, "It's sweet that you try so hard, even without much to show for it." Everyone else chuckled, eager not to be on the receiving end of her next barb, while I sat frozen with a smile glued to my face, swallowing the humiliation like bitter medicine. That was the power she wielded, the ability to make you feel like you didn't belong, even in rooms where you had every right to stand. And now here I was, staring at an invitation to my son's wedding, knowing she would be there too, knowing she would arrive in her polished dress, dripping with her polished words, and that she would find a way to remind me, once again, of the distance she believed stretched between us. I pressed the envelope against my chest and closed my eyes. For a moment, the pride and the dread tangled together until I couldn't tell which was stronger. My son's happiness was everything. I had raised him for this, loved him for this, fought for this. Nothing, no one was going to take away from that joy. Still, I couldn't silence the worry whispering in the back of my mind. People like her didn't need facts. They didn't need truth. They only needed perception. One lifted eyebrow, one muttered comment, one deliberate refusal. And suddenly, the entire room would turn to look at me, wondering if perhaps I truly didn't belong at my own son's wedding. I set the invitation on the kitchen counter and leaned against the sink, staring out the window as the late afternoon sun painted the sky in strokes of pink and gold. "Stay strong," I whispered to myself. "This isn't about her. This is about him." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew she wouldn't make it easy. She never did. I imagined her arriving at the wedding hall, her heels clicking against the marble, her laughter ringing too loud, her voice carrying across the room as if the entire gathering were her stage. I could almost hear her already. Oh, is she really here? I didn't expect her to be invited. I could almost see the sympathetic looks passed my way, the sideways glances, the polite but pitying smiles. And then I imagined something else. I imagined her face, that perfect mask of superiority, crumbling when she realized what no one had bothered to tell her. That the woman she was so determined to belittle was not some ordinary guest, not some insignificant presence tucked into a corner. I was the mother of the groom. My son's wedding was not her stage, it was mine. That thought made me straighten my back, lift my chin, and let a small, quiet smile spread across my lips. She could laugh, she could sneer, she could whisper all she wanted. At the end of the day, there was one truth she could never erase. My son was marrying the woman he loved, and nothing she said or did would ever take that away. I picked up the invitation one more time and slid it carefully back into its envelope. My hands still trembled slightly, but not from fear. Not this time. They trembled from the anticipation of what was coming. Because deep down, I knew something she didn't. This wedding would not be remembered for her pride. It would be remembered for her silence. And I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when it happened. And I knew the moment she walked into that wedding hall, history was about to repeat itself, but with a twist she never saw coming. I didn't meet her in a grand moment. I met her in a kitchen that smelled like store-bought frosting and overcooked coffee, at a birthday party where mismatched chairs were squeezed around a table that was doing its best to be generous. She arrived late and loud, trailing a perfume that turned the small room into a stage, and she looked at me like the host had handed her a chipped glass. She didn't say my name that day. She assessed it. She rolled it around in her mouth as if it were too simple, too modest, too me. Back then, my life was stitched together by pay stubs and promises. I worked, came home, worked again. My son was small and curious and sticky-fingered, the kind of child who would hug your knees in the middle of a sentence and make you forget whatever sentence you were speaking. People like her didn't live in my lane, but families, real families, have more intersections than highways. Eventually, paths cross, and when they do, you see who yields. She never yielded, not once. The second time we met, she touched my elbow with a smile that had teeth. "I've heard about you," she said, like I was an urban legend. "You're the practical one." The word hung there, dressed in politeness, holding hands with contempt. Practical meant you buy what's on sale. Practical meant you make do. Practical meant you don't belong, where things are bought for show. I remember glancing down at my dress. It was navy blue and honest. It didn't pretend to be silk. It didn't float when I walked, but it was mine. I had bought it after 3 months of saying no to everything else. I wore it like a small miracle. She wore her dress like a verdict. She took her time with me, the way cats take time with birds. If I complimented the flowers, she corrected the pronunciation of their names. If I brought a dish, she noted an ingredient that could have been used. When I spoke, she practiced the art of interruption, those delicate collisions where your sentence is gentled into silence by someone who's learned to talk as if pausing would bankrupt them. And I endured it because there are wars you wage, and there are ones you walk past. At that time, my son's happiness was my only country, and I guarded its borders with a vigilance you couldn't see. What I learned early is that she is a collector, not of art or porcelain. She collects moments where she appears taller by making someone else seem smaller. She is the queen of the casual downgrade. You're braver than I am wearing that color, or I love how you don't worry about designer labels, or it must be freeing to not care what people think. She frames her insults and guilt wraps them in compliments so shiny you almost miss the bruise beneath. It would be easy to say I hated her, but hate is too loud for what we were. What sat between us was quieter, a careful distance built over many rooms. What I felt was not hatred so much as a steady, accumulating ache-like, carrying a bag that seems empty until you realize you've been holding it for hours. One afternoon, years before the wedding, we were volunteering at a community center. She breezed in like she had brought the concept of charity with her, announced a schedule no one had asked for, and started rearranging people like chairs. I was assigned to the craft table with the kids because I'm good with mess, she said, smiling in a way that told me she didn't mean paint. While we cut stars from yellow paper, she floated from station to station, polishing her image with every stop. At the end of the day, someone suggested a group photo. We gathered near the stage. She naturally took center, the way people do when gravity favors them. I stood at the edge, one arm around a little boy who refused to let go of the glitter glue. "Come closer," the photographer called, and she lifted a single finger without turning her head, guiding me 2 steps to her left, close enough to fill a gap, not close enough to belong. Even in pictures, people like her arrange the narrative. Later, when the photo was posted online, I read the comments. "So proud of you, you're incredible. You're such a leader," all under her smiling face. And there I was at the margin, half of my laugh cropped out, the little boy's glitter still sparkling in my hair. That image stayed with me, way I could be present and peripheral in the same frame. I don't tell you this to gather sympathy. I tell you this because it explains the sting that flared when the wedding invitation arrived. It explains why my jaw tightened when I pictured her walking into the venue with that stride she reserves for carpeted floors, the one that says the ground is thrilled to be beneath her. Another time, this one a family reunion in a rented hall with unforgiving lights. She asked me loudly if I was dating. The music had just paused, so the question landed like silverware dropped onto tile. I smiled, said no, and she pressed her lips, considering. "It's just that you're always so busy," she said. "Children need more than love. They need reach." She spoke the last word like a rope thrown from a boat to a swimmer. She did not offer it to me. I looked at my son then, across the room, mid-laugh with a cousin, his whole face open, the way faces are before someone teaches them to close. I thought about the shoes I had skipped, and the nights I had stayed up sewing seams, and the invoices I had paid in installments. Reach? I had given him wings. They were made of grit and sleep deprivation, yes, but they were still wings. These memories are not carefully chosen. They are simply plentiful. My history with her is a string of small cuts, none fatal, all precise. She has a way of walking away from an exchange and leaving you behind to unpack the boxes she shoved into your hands. Unasked for opinions, subtle doubts, the echo of laughter that isn't entirely friendly. But here is the part of the story that matters most. I did not return the favor. I learned to let her theatrics be her own. I learned that if you stop auditioning for approval, the room loses its power. At times I failed, yes. At times I walked home with words circling my head like restless birds. But I kept putting one foot in front of the other. I kept building a life that did not require her applause to stand. And then there was the day she crossed a line. It was another celebration. There are always celebrations when families are wide and holidays are forgiving. I had brought a cake I baked, the kind with imperfect edges that announce themselves as made by a human hand. She glanced at it, tilted her head, and said, "It's sweet when people try," then cut herself a slice, so thin it was practically theoretical. People laughed. I laughed too, because sometimes the only other option is to cry, and we were near the dip table. Much later, when the evening thinned and conversations softened, she approached me near the door. Her hand rested on my arm, heavy with rings. "You're doing your best," she said. "I can see that. But don't take it personally when doors don't open for you. Some doors are simply calibrated, as if my knuckles were the problem, not the lock." I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table, long after the lights were off, listening to the refrigerator hum. I thought of my son asleep in the next room, his future unfolding like a road after dawn. And I made a promise. I will not let anyone calibrate his world smaller. I will not let anyone convince him that he needs to be invited to be worthy. That vow became a quiet engine in me. It carried me through the small humiliations and the bills and the long hours. Through every sideways glance, every delicate dismissal, I kept moving. I made birthdays out of coupons and holidays out of hand-me-downs. I taught my son to spot kindness in a crowd and to walk toward it. So when the wedding invitation came and my breath caught and her perfume haunted my memory like a bell, I also felt something sturdier harden in my spine. My place at that wedding was not open to debate. It wasn't a favor, and it wasn't a courtesy. It was a fact. A title nobody could edit, mother of the groom. And that is the truth she didn't know as she rehearsed her lines, polished her smile, and prepared her next delicate takedown. She thought the wedding would be another room she could arrange, another picture she could center. She didn't realize the frame had already been built, the glass already set, the label engraved, because our history together is a ledger of moments that made me quieter, then stronger, then unshakable. She taught me without meaning to that dignity does not ask permission to exist. It simply stands up again and again until its standing becomes the room's new gravity. That is why the memory of her refusing to sit near me lands the way it does. It isn't the refusal itself. It's the years before it. It's the practiced choreography of belittlement. meeting the unmoving wall of truth. And so, when I tell you she refused the seat, when I tell you she wrinkled her nose as if proximity to me could wrinkle her reputation, you have to understand she wasn't rejecting a chair. She was trying to reject a story that didn't place her at the center. She was trying one last time to crop me out of the picture. But this time, the picture had a caption etched in gold. And that's exactly what walked through the doors on the morning of the wedding. The caption she hadn't read yet, the title she couldn't change. And when the wedding day finally arrived, she wasted no time, proving nothing had changed. The morning of the wedding felt different before I even opened my eyes. There are days when the air itself seems charged, when the light spilling through the curtains feels heavier with meaning. That was this day. I woke before dawn, my heart already beating faster than usual. A nervous mix of pride and anticipation pulling me from my bed. My son was getting married. Just saying those words to myself made my chest swell and ache all at once. I brewed a pot of coffee. Though my hands trembled so much, I spilled a few drops across the counter. I couldn't stop smiling. I thought about his suit, pressed and hanging since last night, the boutonniere I had checked 3 times, the vows he had stayed up writing long after the house went quiet. He was ready. And as his mother, I wanted to be ready too. I laid out my dress on the bed, smoothing every wrinkle as though my hands could iron out the years that had led to this moment. It was an extravagant, not something chosen to dazzle or compete. It was steady, elegant in its simplicity, a color I knew would flatter me without shouting for attention. This wasn't my stage, it was his. My role was to stand with quiet dignity, to beam with pride, to support him as I always had. And yet, as I pinned my hair back and studied my reflection, I felt that shadow again, that whisper of unease, because I knew she would be there. She had circled this day on her calendar with relish, not for love of the couple, but for the spectacle. She thrived on events like this, where every detail could be measured, every interaction observed, every seat a rung in her imagined ladder of importance. I pictured her arrival, the sharp click of her heels, the perfectly rehearsed smile, the way her laughter would lift a little too high just to announce her presence. I could already hear her, voice crisp and cutting, telling an usher exactly where she would and would not sit. She was going to test me, I had no doubt about that. The only question was how and when. My son knocked on my bedroom door just as I was fastening my necklace. "Mom," he said softly, peeking his head in, "you look beautiful." His voice caught me off guard. For a moment, I didn't see the grown man in the suit. I saw the little boy in sneakers, holding up a crooked paper heart he had cut for me in elementary school. My throat tightened. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered. "You do too." He laughed and shook his head. "Nervous?" he asked. "Of course," I said, "but the good kind, the kind that means today matters." We shared a quiet moment then, mother and son, before the whirlwind of the day swept us away. And inside, I reminded myself again and again. This was his wedding. Nothing else mattered. Not her, not the whispers, not the sideways glances. Today belonged to him. Still, as I gathered my things and headed out the door, I braced myself, because if there's one thing I had learned from our history, it's that she never wasted an opportunity to remind me of my place, or at least the place she believed I belonged. The ride to the venue felt longer than it was. Every turn of the car wheels seemed to pull me closer, not just to the ceremony, but to the collision I knew was waiting. I gripped the invitation in my lap as though it were a shield. I told myself over and over, "You're the mother of the groom. No one can take that from you." But under that mantra was the nervous flutter of what might happen when our paths finally crossed again. When the cars stopped in front of the hall, my breath caught. The building was draped in flowers, music spilling softly into the morning air, guests already gathering in clusters of color and excitement. It was beautiful, almost too beautiful to feel real. I stepped out, smoothed my dress one last time, and lifted my chin. This was it. And I knew the moment she walked into that wedding hall, history was about to repeat itself, but with a twist she never saw coming. Because the first time our eyes met that day, she made her move without hesitation. The wedding hall felt like it was breathing that morning, alive with voices, footsteps, the rustle of fabric, and the hush of anticipation that clung to the air. Music floated from hidden speakers, strings rising and falling in graceful arcs, while the scent of roses, lilies, and polished wood wrapped itself around every guest who stepped through the tall glass doors. It was beautiful, almost unbearably so, and yet, as I crossed the threshold, my chest tightened. Because beauty wasn't the only thing waiting for me in that hall. I saw her before she saw me. She never just entered a room, she arrived, as though the very space had been waiting to be graced with her presence. Her gown clung perfectly to her figure, not a thread out of place, shimmering in a way that demanded attention. Her hair was sculpted into soft waves, her jewelry catching every glimmer of light, and her perfume announced her 3 steps before she came into view. She walked as if the world had parted the carpet just for her heels, as if the earth itself was proud to be under her. Guests turned as she moved through them, offering greetings, compliments, and those practiced smiles people save for the socially powerful. She absorbed it all like sunshine, nodding just enough to acknowledge them, but never too much to risk dimming her own glow. And then, mid-laugh, her eyes found me. It was as if time slowed. Her smile didn't falter, it simply changed, tilted, hardened. It curled at the edges into something sharp, something meant for me alone. That look-it was the same one I had known for years. A reminder, a message. You don't belong here? My stomach tightened, but I lifted my chin. If she expected me to flinch, she would be disappointed. She took her time crossing the room, making sure to greet others first, ensuring that by the time she reached me, everyone nearby would be watching. Her entrance was her art, and I was her chosen target. By the time she stood in front of me, I could feel the weight of dozens of curious eyes. "Well," she said finally, her voice smooth, deliberate, loud enough to carry. "I didn't expect to see you here." The words were ordinary. It was the way she said them. Like I had wandered into a private gala I hadn't been invited to. Like I had shown up at the wrong door. It wasn't a greeting. It was a question disguised as a statement. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, small but steady. "It's my son's wedding," I replied. "Of course I'd be here." For the briefest second, something flickered across her face, something sharp, almost startled, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that thin, polished smile she wore like armor. She tilted her head, her earrings swinging, her eyes glinting like steel under glass. "Ah, yes, how wonderful." There it was again, that old performance. The same act I had watched her perfect for years. She leaned in slightly, as though sharing a secret. her perfume clouding the space between us. It must feel strange being in a place like this. Her eyes swept over the chandeliers, the velvet drapes, the waiters balancing silver trays. So different, so out of the ordinary, I suppose. The insult was as delicate as lace, but the sting landed just the same. She hadn't changed, not one bit. She still found her power in these tiny cuts, the subtle reminders that in her eyes, I was an outsider even in my own son's story. For a moment, I wanted to bite back, to tell her that she measured worth in chandeliers and champagne, while I had measured it in scraped knees, homework help, and midnight meals cooked after double shifts. That she collected compliments while I collected memories of a boy growing into a man who loved fiercely and stood tall. But I didn't. Instead, I held her gaze, silent, unmoving, unflinching. She shifted slightly, discomfort rippling across her perfect face. My silence had become its own mirror, and she didn't like what it reflected. Her eyes darted toward the ushers who were guiding guests to their seats, and that's when she made her move. "Excuse me," she called sweetly, waving over a young usher who looked barely out of high school. Her voice carried, smooth and sharp as glass. "I prefer not to sit too close to certain people." She didn't bother hiding the glance she threw my way. The usher froze, caught between duty and disbelief. Around us, the hum of conversation dipped. People leaned closer. A few gasped. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, not from shame, but from the sheer audacity of it. She hadn't whispered. She hadn't hinted. She had broadcasted her disdain for me, right here, right now, at my son's wedding. I could feel the eyes on me curious, sympathetic, awkward. Some guests turned their heads as though embarrassed for me. Others watched openly, waiting for me to crumble. But I didn't. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I smiled. A real smile this time, not the kind I used to wear to mask humiliation. A calm, steady smile. "It's fine," I said softly, but loud enough for the usher and hair to hear. "She can sit wherever she likes. I'm here for my son, not for her." And then I turned away. The silence that followed wasn't mine. It was hers. A silence so sharp, it cut through the hall, louder than any words. She hadn't expected that. She had expected me to argue, to defend, to flail under her public humiliation. She had wanted a scene. What she got instead was her own cruelty, laid bare for everyone to see, with no defense to shield it. The usher looked at me, gratitude flickering in his nervous eyes. Guests whispered, their voices like small waves against the marble. And she stood rooted in place, her smile frozen, her performance slipping. For years, she had choreographed our encounters. She wrote the lines, directed the scene, made sure I played the part she cast for Meath insecure, the lesser, the one on the margins. But not this time. This time, I refused to be part of her play. I walked to my seat with slow, deliberate steps. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was something else, something stronger. A quiet satisfaction, a deep, grounding pride. Because I knew what she didn't know yet. I knew what she was about to discover. The seat she had just turned her nose up at, the one she refused so openly, so arrogantly, was the one that mattered most. It wasn't just any seat. It was the seat of the mother of the groom, and soon she was going to realize exactly whose place she had dismissed. But before that truth could land, she spread her poison in another way, through whispers sharp enough to cut. After that first encounter, the room seemed to shift. Guests pretended not to notice, but I could feel it, the small glances, the quick looks passed over shoulders, the quiet stir that always follows a scene. She had tried to humiliate me openly and for once had failed. But people like her don't retreat easily. They regroup, they reload, they find new weapons, sharper ones, and hers had always been whispers. I took my seat near the front, the place reserved for the groom's mother, my son's mother, and tried to focus on the beauty around me. The flowers were breathtaking, white lilies and roses, blooming in arrangements taller than some of the children, darting between the chairs. The music swelled gently, weaving a tapestry of anticipation. But beneath the beauty, I could feel her. I could sense her circling like a hawk in the rafters, waiting for another chance to strike. I caught her reflection in the glass as she leaned in toward another guest. Her lips barely moved, her voice so low it forced people to lean closer. That was her specialty, poison disguised as intimacy. She could slice you to ribbons and make it feel like a secret being shared. I didn't have to hear the words to know what they were. I'd heard them 100 times before. She doesn't belong here, she's out of place, it's so strange, isn't it? A woman, sitting 2 rows behind me, frowned slightly, shifting in her seat. Another pressed her lips together, caught between politeness and discomfort. I knew then that the whispers were spreading. She had turned the air itself into her stage, weaving doubt in every corner. The ache in my chest grew heavy, but I refused to bend. I kept my head high, hands folded in my lap, eyes fixed on the aisle where my son would soon appear. Every part of me wanted to whirl around, to catch her in the act, to force her venom into the open where it couldn't fester, but I didn't. Because sometimes the greatest weapon isn't defense, it's patience. She grew bolder as the minutes passed. I saw her lean toward a younger woman, adjusting her necklace while speaking out of the side of her mouth. The younger woman's eyebrows shot up, her eyes darting toward me before quickly looking away. The sting of it cut deep, to know that even now, even here, she was using me as her currency to buy attention. I shifted in my chair, swallowing the lump in my throat. My hands trembled slightly, but I pressed them down against the fabric of my dress, willing myself to stay still, because I understood something in that moment. Her whispers could bruise, yes, but they could not erase. They couldn't rewrite the truth. And the truth was that this wedding wasn't hers. It wasn't her show, her performance, her chance to shine. It was my son's day, my son's story. And in that story, I was unshakable. Still, the tension mounted. I heard muffled laughter behind me, sharp and quick, and I knew she had landed one of her barbs. For a second, shame threatened to flood me, to drag me back to every room where she had mocked me, every gathering where I had walked away with my dignity frayed. But then I thought of my son, of the man he had become, of the vows he would soon speak, of the love he had found. And I reminded myself she could whisper all she wanted, but her words couldn't touch him. They couldn't touch the years I had given, the sacrifices I had made, the unshakable bond between a mother and her son. That was when I realized something powerful. Her whispers weren't proof of her strength. They were proof of her fear, because if she truly believed what she said, that I didn't belong, that I wasn't worthy, she wouldn't need to convince anyone else. She would simply sit back, secure in her superiority. But she couldn't. She needed an audience. She needed agreement. She needed validation. And in that need, she revealed her weakness. I let out a slow breath, a smile touching my lips. Let her whisper. Let her poison the air with her smallness. I didn't need to answer. I didn't need to fight. The truth would speak louder than anything she could murmur in the shadows. Because soon, very soon, the music would swell, the doors would open, and my son would walk into that room. And with him, the truth would arrive like a thunderclap. And as the ushers began guiding guests to their places, she tried once more to draw her line to make it clear she wanted nothing to do with me. The music softened as the ushers began their final round, guiding guests to their seats. The air shifted, people's voices dipped, conversations tapered, and the energy turned from chatter to anticipation. The ceremony was about to begin. I smoothed my dress across my lap and tried to steady the rhythm of my breathing. I had survived her entrance. I had survived the sting of her whispers. But a part of me knew she wasn't finished. She never was. And I was right. As one of the ushers approached her with a polite bow, extending an arm to indicate the row she had been assigned, she froze. For a split second, her polished smile slipped. I watched as her eyes darted toward me sitting calmly in the front, the spot reserved for the mother of the groom. Her jaw tightened. She didn't want to be near me, not in the same row, not in the same air. "Oh no," she said sweetly, her voice carrying across the aisle, just enough for others to hear. There must be some mistake. Her words wrapped in honey, but her tone was steel. "I'd prefer a seat elsewhere." She lifted her chin, gesturing lightly toward the back rows, as though they were beneath her but still preferable to proximity with me. The usher hesitated, glancing nervously toward the front. "This is your assigned seat, Mom," he said carefully. "Family of the groom." Her laugh rang out sharp, dismissive, theatrical. "Family? Oh, darling, let's not be dramatic. I hardly think we need to pretend. It'll just sit somewhere more fitting." The weight of her words landed like stones. Conversations faltered. Guests turned their heads, eyes darting between us. I could feel the tension building, that heavy silence that thickens when people don't know whether to intervene or watch the spectacle unfold. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I wanted to rise, to tell her to sit wherever she pleased, to strip her of the satisfaction she craved. But then something inside me shifted. I realized this wasn't about the seat. It was about the statement. She wasn't rejecting a chair, she was rejecting me. Rejecting my right to sit where I belonged, to be recognized, to exist in a place she couldn't control. The usher looked to me for guidance, panic flickering in his young face. I met his eyes and gave him the smallest nod. He didn't deserve to be caught in this crossfire. He was just trying to do his job. "It's fine," I said, my voice even, clear enough to carry without rising. "If she's uncomfortable, let her sit wherever she wants." Her eyes lit with triumph, but only for a second. Because what followed wasn't victory, it was exposure. The ripple of whispers that spread through the hall wasn't admiration. It was judgment. Heads tilted, eyebrows rose. Guests exchanged looks, their gazes full of quiet disapproval. By refusing the seat, she hadn't diminished, Metch had diminished herself. I sat there steady, rooted, watching as she drifted toward the back of the room with exaggerated grace, her gown sweeping behind her like she was retreating from a battlefield she claimed she hadn't lost. But I knew, everyone knew. For all her poise, for all her carefully curated performance, she had revealed her pettiness for what it was. And as I folded my hands in my lap once more, something warm bloomed in my chest, because I knew what was coming. The ceremony would begin, the truth would unfold, and she would realize, in front of everyone, exactly whose seat she had turned her nose up at. The music swelled, the doors opened, and as my son stepped into the room, the truth began to dawn on her face. While the ushers shuffled programs and the string quartet tuned their instruments, I watched the doors at the far end of the hall and felt time folding back on itself. The flowers, the music, the shimmer of silk and satin, none of it could quiet the sudden rush of memories that rose in me like a tide. I saw my son's suit hanging in the groomsman's room, and over it, 1,000 smaller scenes layered like translucent paper. I saw the night I first brought him home, swaddled and blinking, the apartment dim and too quiet, except for the radiator hissing. I remember sitting on the floor with him because I didn't trust the old couch not to creak and wake him, the two of us lit by the blue glow of the street light through the blinds. I had no road map, just a hungry love that refused to sleep. I learned his cries like a language. I measured my days in bottles, burp cloths, and the brief, holy silence when he finally drifted off. Those were the first trades I made without hesitation. My rest for his peace, my fear for his warmth. There was a winter when the heater gave out, and the landlord took a week to fix it. I boiled water on the stove and cracked open the oven door, layering us in sweaters and blankets, turning bath time into a game of clouds and ships so he wouldn't shiver. I remember looking at the frost feathering across the inside of the window and thinking, I will be the heat. I will be the heat until someone else is. And then there was the spring I took a second job, the kind that makes your feet ache and your back burn, coming home with calluses that made me drop dishes because I couldn't feel the plates. He would meet me at the door with a drawing clenched in his little Honda house, with a roof like a triangle and 2 stick figures holding hands underneath. He always drew the same 2. We laughed at our dinners when the noodles stuck together and called it brick pasta, and we ate on the floor sometimes because the table wobbled and I never did get around to fixing it. I remember his first school project, a papier-mâché volcano he worried wouldn't erupt. He chewed his lips so hard it went white, while I stirred the baking soda and dish soap and food coloring in the kitchen. It won't work, he whispered, refusing to meet my eyes. And when the volcano foamed and spilled red down the sides, he jumped back, then forward, then laughed so hard he knocked over a chair. I cleaned the floor afterward by myself and kept the towel with pink stains for too long, a secret flag reminding me that failure can be coaxed into wonder with enough patience and a little trickery. But not all the memories were bright. Some were heavy, sitting like small anvils in my chest. There were years when money didn't stretch, and I did. Thin and long across 6-day work weeks, lying about my hunger so he'd take the last slice of toast. There were birthdays I built from coupons and a party banner I cut from old magazines and tape. He loved it because he didn't know yet what other children had. And there were the voices, sometimes hers, sometimes echoes of others, like her measuring me against scales I never agreed to stand on. You try, they'd murmur, you're doing your best, as if kindness were a velvet cover for condescension. Hell need more than love, she once told me, and I swallowed the words I wanted to say. What else do you think has gotten us this far? I thought of the day he came home from school quiet and older, a day that changed the way he held his shoulders. "They said we don't have a real family," he muttered, rage leaking through the cracks. And I felt a sharp, possessive fury rise in me, hotter than shame, clearer than grief. I took his face in my hands and told him the truth we'd stand on forever. Families aren't measured by their doors or their dinners. Families are measured by what they refuse to let each other carry alone. We made hot chocolate that night and drew our own family tree on a scrap of cardboard. We put our names at the trunk, not the branches, because that's where the strength lives. He taped it to the fridge, and I left it there even after the edges curled and browned. As the wedding coordinator floated past with a clipboard, I saw another flash. The time his shoelaces broke before a championship game. He was 12 and fierce, all limbs and speed, using glue like courage to hold himself together. I knelt on the asphalt and threaded a spare ribbon through his cleats, my fingers stiff in the cold. And when he won, he ripped the ribbon out and tied it around his wrist. He wore it for a week like a talisman until it unraveled into threads. "You saved me," he said, and I wanted to tell him that saving is just loving on a clock. But sacrifice isn't always grand. Sometimes it's small and hidden, saying no to yourself, so your child can say yes to something that will change them. I said no to dresses, and yes to field trips, no to sleep, and yes to late-night science projects, no to quiet evenings, and yes to school plays, where he walked across the stage and bowed to 3 people clapping like a stadium. I learned to show up even when I was invisible. I learned to celebrate victories that fit in the palm of a hand. And I learned to let the cutting voices slide off me like rain off a good coat, because my son was watching and I refused to teach him to be porous to cruelty. She, that woman, was woven through those years like a thread of static. At reunions and birthdays and the occasional polished event, she would materialize beside me with the same thin smile and the same teeth covered in silk. "You're resilient," she'd say, selecting her word like a jewel. Resilience is what people call you when they think you'll never reach where they're standing. She meant it as a ceiling. I received it as fuel. On the nights I wanted to crumble, I'd hear her voice and lace another pair of shoes, make another call, stay 5 minutes longer in a place where I could earn what we needed to keep going. Every version of you she ever gave me became a plank in the bridge we crossed together. Watching the doors now, I searched the crowd and found my son through the glass. Just a blur of navy and white, a hand on a friend's shoulder, his laugh tilted up to the ceiling. He looked like a man I would have introduced myself to if we'd met as strangers. He looked like every yes I'd ever said. Pride swelled in me so hard it hurt. Not the showy pride that needs witnesses, but the private kind, built-in groceries carried up 3 flights of stairs, and scraped knees kissed until they forgot how to sting. The tension that had been simmering her whispers, her refusal, the sideways eyes didn't disappear. It sharpened. It turned into a bright point I could hold steady in my palm. Because the truth is that sacrifice doesn't erase insult. It renders insult irrelevant. Her contempt was loud, yes, but my history with my son was louder. A chorus only the 2 of us could hear. It sang of mornings we made from broken nights, of lunches packed with notes tucked deep, of holidays we invented from nothing and loved anyway. It sang of the one unbending law in our house: we don't let anyone else tell us what our worth is. And in that song my spine settled, my breathing deepened. I felt my shoulders ease back into themselves. into the shape they had taken from years of carrying and not complaining. This day was not an audition for acceptance. It was the harvest. Everything I had traded away had grown into this room, into his bright, steady face, into the vows he would speak, with a voice I still heard in two pitches, boy, and man overlapping like harmony. So when I glanced over my shoulder and saw her back where she had demanded to be, performingly apart, something inside me went quiet and clear. Let her posture, let her curate, let her stitch her stories from borrowed threads. My story didn't need embroidery. It needed only this: my son stepping into his life with a courage I recognized because I had packed it for him, piece by piece, across years that taught us both to want better without belittling anyone to get it. Everything I endured led to this moment, his happiness. Every choice I made, every shift I worked, every room I left early to cry in the car, and every room I stayed in longer than was comfortable. It all pointed here like compass needles finding north, and she, with all her measured superiority, hadn't learned the simplest truth. Worth isn't loud. It's steady, it shows up, it stays. The quartet paused. A hush moved through the hall, soft and complete. Somewhere behind the doors, shoes scuffed once on tile, and I knew he was ready. And as the ceremony began, she still didn't realize the truth. The hush in the hall deepened, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. A soft ripple moved through the guests as the doors at the far end swung open, revealing the first glimpse of white. The bride appeared, radiant and trembling with joy, her arm looped through her father's, her veil catching the light like spun silver. A wave of emotion surged inside me, so strong it blurred my vision. This was the moment my son had been waiting for. The moment every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every whispered prayer had been leading toward. The music swelled, violins pulling every heartstring in the room, and guests rose to their feet as one. I rose too, my hands clutching the back of the chair before me, steadying myself against the swell of feeling that threatened to overwhelm me. My son stood at the front, his eyes locked on hers, his entire body leaning forward, as if he couldn't wait another second for her to reach him. In that instant, I no longer saw the boy I had raised. I saw a man steady, strong, ready to build a life of his own. But even in the beauty of it, I felt her. She sat in the back, posture perfect, her face arranged in a look of mild boredom, as if this union were just another performance she had seen 100 times before. She clapped politely at the right moments, tilted her head when others gasped at the bride's gown, but her eyes flicked toward me more than once, sharp and assessing. It was as if she was still waiting for her chance, still desperate to remind the room of her self-declared superiority. I ignored her. For once, I let her fade into the periphery where she belonged, because all I could see was my son's trembling smile as he took his bride's hand. All I could hear was the quiver in his voice as he spoke his vows, promising love, patience, and unwavering devotion. My heart swelled until I thought it might burst. Every word he spoke felt like a reflection of the years I had whispered similar promises to him, when he was sick, when he was scared, when the world tried to convince us we were less than we truly were. The guests sighed, dabbed at their eyes, clutched hands together as if holding on to the magic of the moment. But I noticed her, sitting rigid, her lips pressed into the faintest line, as if even here, even now, she refused to soften. To her, I was still just another guest, a woman she had successfully diminished. She still didn't know. She hadn't realized who I was, hadn't understood the significance of the seat she had rejected, hadn't pieced together that my very presence at the front wasn't incidental. It was earned, it was rightful, it was unshakable. The vows ended, the kiss sealed them, and the hall erupted into applause. People rose to their feet again, cheering, clapping, laughing, their joy spilling over like sunlight. I clapped too, tears streaking down my cheeks, my body trembling with relief and pride. I glanced once toward her. She clapped more slowly, carefully, her smile rehearsed, her mask firmly in place. Still, she didn't know. Not yet, because the real revelation wasn't waiting at the altar. It was waiting at the reception. It was waiting in the seating chart, in the introductions, in the undeniable truth that would silence her whispers forever. She thought she had won by sitting apart, by refusing to acknowledge me, by playing her petty games. But soon, very soon, she would learn the truth in front of everyone. And then, at the reception, the truth hit her harder than she ever expected. The reception hall sparkled with light and laughter, the air rich with the smell of food and champagne. Guests crowded around the seating chart, finding their names, their places in the grand celebration. I stayed near my table, heart still glowing from the ceremony, when I saw her sweep in. She approached the chart with her usual air of superiority, scanning for her name. At first, her smile was smug, certain she'd be placed somewhere fitting for her self-declared status. But then I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, the way her lips tightened as she read again and again. The truth landed hard. The seat she had refused earlier wasn't just another chair. It was the seat of honor, the place reserved for the groom's mother. My seat. The room was noticed. Guests exchanged glances, whispers spreading quickly. They remembered her loud refusal, her dismissive tone, her arrogant little performance. Now all of it had collapsed under the weight of one undeniable fact. She hadn't humiliated me as she had humiliated herself. I didn't move. I didn't smirk or gloat. I simply sat in my rightful place, steady and calm, letting silence do what words never could. And in that silence, she shrank. For the first time, her performance failed. But her embarrassment didn't stop her from trying to save face. The music was light, the clinking of glasses filling the air. But I felt her presence before I saw her. She walked toward me with that same practiced grace, though her smile trembled at the edges. The whispers of her mistake still lingered in the room, and she was desperate to rewrite the story. "Ah," she said lightly, her voice pitched too high. "What a funny misunderstanding earlier." She waved her hand as if brushing away dust. I had no idea her words trailed, searching for an escape route. Guests nearby leaned in, curious. She wanted me to play along, to smooth over her embarrassment, to grant her dignity she had denied me for years. I looked at her, calm, steady, the noise of the room fading around us. "No misunderstanding," I said softly. "You chose your seat. I chose mine." Her smile faltered, her eyes darting left and right, as if hoping someone else would rescue her. No one did. The weight of her own arrogance pressed down, and for the first time, she stood without an audience to applaud her performance. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to gloat. My silence said everything, and in that silence, she finally understood what respect really meant. And as I sat back, I realized the wedding had given me more than joy, it had given me quiet victory. As I leaned back in my chair, the reception unfolding around me like a scene from a dream, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all swirled together into a melody of joy. My son and his bride swayed across the dance floor, faces glowing with the kind of love that silences every doubt and drowns out every shadow. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking of survival or of appearances or of keeping my head high against ridicule. I was simply a mother, watching the boy I had raised step fully into his future. And yet, through the beauty of that moment, I couldn't ignore her. She sat at her table in the back, her posture still perfect, but her performance broken. Her laughter was too sharp, her smile too brittle, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped bird. She was trying to pretend she hadn't been unmasked, but everyone saw it. The same woman who had loudly refused to sit near me was now exposed as the one who had turned her nose up at the groom's own mother. Her pride had been shattered not by me, not by any words I spoke, but by her own arrogance. That's when the lesson crystallized in me. For so long, I had wondered if staying silent, if enduring her cutting remarks, and choosing dignity over drama had made me look weak. I had carried those questions like stones in my pockets. Was I too quiet? Too patient? Should I have fought back sooner? But watching her wilt beneath her own actions, I realized something. Silence is not weakness. Silence, when rooted in truth, is power. She had mistaken my composure for fragility. She thought her whispers and sideways glances had diminished me. But what she never understood is that respect doesn't come from theatrics. It doesn't come from diamonds on your neck or the volume of your voice. Respect is built in the invisible hours, in the sacrifices no one claps for, in the steady, unwavering love that never demands a spotlight. Every insult she had ever tossed my way had been a mirror of her own insecurities. Every time she tried to make me small, she was only revealing the cracks in her own foundation. Because real respect, the kind that endures long after the music fades, can't be stolen or denied. It's written into the lives you touch, the children you raise, the love you give when no one else is watching. I thought back to all the nights I had worked until my body ached, all the mornings I had sent my son off with a lunch packed out of pennies and love, all the times I had swallowed my own hunger so he could be full. Those were the bricks of respect. Those were the stones of dignity. And no amount of whispering, no amount of cruelty could take that from me. I watched my son twirl his new wife, her laughter bubbling out like champagne, and tears pricked my eyes. This was the victory, not her humiliation, not the whispers of the crowd, but this his happiness, his joy, his life built on the foundation I had laid with my own hands. She could never take that. She could never touch it. Across the room, she tried again to lift her chin, to toss her head back with false confidence. But it was too late. Everyone knew. The truth had settled into the air, undeniable. She had spent years trying to teach me that respect was something granted by people like her. But tonight, she learned the opposite. Respect isn't granted by the proud. Respect belongs to those who have lived, sacrificed, and loved in ways that no audience could ever fully measure. And as I sat there, calm, quiet, unshaken, I realized this wedding had given me more than joy. It had given me closure. It had given me a victory that needed no applause, no vengeance. It was the victory of finally seeing her for what she was, and finally seeing myself for what I had always been, worthy. And my final words to her still echo in my mind today. The night slowed as the last of the toasts faded and the dance floor filled with laughter. My son and his bride moved from table to table, their joy spilling into every handshake, every hug, every smile. I sat at my place, the place she had so boldly rejected, and let the warmth of it all sink into my bones. For years I had dreamed of this day. For years I had worried someone might try to tarnish it. And for years I had wondered if I would have the strength to face her again. Now I knew. She approached one last time. Her mask was still on, her lips stretched in a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her voice feather light, as though she could erase what had happened with charm. "Well," she said softly, "what a beautiful evening this turned out to be." Her gaze flicked to me, searching, pleading for an opening, for mercy, for me to join her pretense and let her save face. I looked at her steadily, my hands folded in my lap, the music swelling around us like a tide. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to humiliate her. All I needed was the truth, simple and undeniable. I leaned in just enough for her to hear me over the noise and said, "You refused to sit near me because you thought I was nobody, and now you know. I am the groom's mother, and nothing you do can change that." Her smile faltered, the color draining from her face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Around us, the celebration roared on glasses clinking, children laughing, the bride's veil shimmering under the lights. No one else noticed her silence, but I did, and so did she. I turned back to the dance floor, to my son spinning his bride in a blur of white and joy, and my heart swelled until it nearly burst. This was my victory, not her humiliation, not her shame, though both had found her tonight, but the simple, breathtaking truth that I already had everything she could never touch. She faded into the background, her pride shattered, her whispers silenced, and I remained exactly where I belonged. She refused to sit near me until she realized it was my son getting married. And in that moment, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I already had it all: love, family, and a place no one could ever take from me.